for coming to the Public Safety Complex. My name is Stephen Paré. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety for the City of Providence. We are here to give you an update and a final report about the incident in October that caused the serious injury of Jhamal Gonsalves. Let me ask the Mayor of the City of Providence, Jorge Elorza, to come up and open it up and say a few words. I'll be back, and then the Colonel will speak, and then we'll open it up for questions. Mayor?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. I know that there's a lot going on in the world and a lot going on here in our state, so I appreciate you being here to cover this important conference. I want to begin first and foremost at really the most important place, and that's acknowledging that a young man is still in very difficult shape in a hospital recovering from the injuries that he sustained in October. We can't lose sight of the fact that there is a young man still injured, there's a family grieving, and our hearts pour out for them. We wish him and his family all the best, and certainly wish him the most speedy and full recovery. Yesterday we followed and we watched the Attorney General's press conference as he detailed and outlined the results of the report and accident reconstruction from that same incident back in October. As we stood here several months ago, we mentioned that it was our goal to make sure that we were open and transparent throughout this entire process. And I am satisfied with how comprehensive the Attorney General's investigation and study was. And what we also said is that we would let the facts lead us to where they may. As the Attorney General emphasized and made so clear yesterday, he was charged with investigating whether the incidents from October rose to the level of criminality. And following that investigation, those facts led them to the conclusion that there was no criminality based on those actions in October. However, that's not the end of the story. What I've also mentioned is that aside from any potential criminal charges, that we would be doing our own investigation and looking at any potential administrative charges for any noncompliance with our policies here internally in the police department. So I'll hand it back to the Commissioner and to the Chief to speak more about that in just a moment. But concurrently, while the state was doing their investigation as to criminal charges, we were doing our own investigation into the administrative charges. And we wanted to time it so that we did not come out before the criminal charges or not were announced. So given that the Attorney General went yesterday, we wanted to, right on the heels of that, come back out and speak to the community and share our results from the administrative charges, from the administrative review. Before I hand it back to the Commissioner, I will also say that while we are free to discuss many aspects of this, there are some small aspects to this which we are not able to discuss, and that's because of the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights prohibitions on what we can share publicly. Again, I want to be as transparent and as open as possible with the entire community, and to the entire extent that we can speak publicly, we will absolutely speak publicly and transparently on all of these issues. More than anything, I raise this because I know that there's an effort at the state level to change and reform LEOBOR, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And this is yet another example why change has to come to that statute. These are matters of great public interest. The public not just demands, but deserves to know what's happening in real time. And I once again want to affirm my support for some of the changes that are being considered for LEOBOR, and I hope that our General Assembly will make those changes. So with that said, I'll pass it back over to the Commissioner of Public Safety, and he will then pass it off to Chief Clements. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I too, as I did yesterday, would like to express our continued thoughts and prayers for that young man that was injured on October 18th as he continues to struggle in his recovery, and we hope and wish and pray that he makes a full recovery. So let me walk you through a bit of what administratively we have concluded. Kyle Endres, it was the officer, as you know, Officer Endres was the officer driving that patrol car. He is a 6-year veteran. We will impose summary punishment on Officer Endres. What does that mean and what did he violate? He violated a couple of our policies. First and foremost, the requirement of a seatbelt, in which he'll be suspended a day for not wearing his seatbelt. And he violated a policy in which he has to drive his vehicle in a safe manner. Technically, what happened as a result of the crash violated this second policy of ours, and he'll be suspended 1 day as a result of that. He was involved in an unpreventable accident, and as a result of that, he will be retrained in EVOC, emergency vehicle operation, so we can prevent a crash similar in the future. We have disciplined other officers. Officer Colley Cabral failed to use her body cam, which I think you all know, and this department knows, it's a requirement by our policy. And from time to time, people, officers, in the height of their duties forget. And this is a first offense, hasn't happened, and so she'll be counseled for not engaging her body cam. Officer Ferraris, who is Louis Ferraris, who also did not engage his body cam. He'll be issued the same sanction in a verbal counseling. Officer Alex Diaz also did not engage his body cam. He too will be given the same sanction in verbal counseling. And we had Officer Sullivan, Colonel, I get McKenna. Officer McKenna, who was the officer that fumbled a little bit with the Narcan, wasn't knowledgeable in how to use that Narcan. Understand that the Narcan had been a new issuance, and he wasn't real familiar with that. We will be giving him retraining and have given retraining for the use of Narcan. When this Narcan comes out, sometimes they change in their structure and in their use. And in this case, that's what happened, and we'll ensure that not only he, but all the officers are properly trained in the use of Narcan, because it's an important tool out there and helping so many. The two other officers that you'll see or you have seen on video after the crash and interactions with one individual that was on sidewalk, those officers will also be held accountable for their behavior. We have not completed that aspect of it, so as the mayor alluded, as a result of Leavenworth, we are prohibited from speaking publicly about the matters of discipline that have not been adjudicated. So those two will eventually be held accountable for behavior and get retrained as a result of that. We talked a little bit about how we come to discipline and what factors are in place. Like any criminal case, any administrative case, no two cases are the same. And we try, just like the courts try, and in labor law, we try to be consistent. We need to be consistent to treat everyone fairly. And so when we have an infraction of a rule or regulation, it's investigated and the facts are borne out. And then the consideration of what type of accountability do we impose, what kind of sanction, when do we terminate, when do we suspend for a long period or a short period. Those are all factors in which the command staff considers in the circumstance and comes to a consistent recommendation of discipline. Discipline is about changing future behavior. It's not about embarrassing officers or embarrassing anyone. How can we prevent this from happening? So when we look at behavior of officers, that's our intent always, and we want to change behavior. Was it deliberate behavior? Was it egregious behavior? And we come to a consistent discipline depending on what the circumstances are. Now, I know you saw, and I certainly saw, when Officer Kyle Endres ran to Mr. Gonsalves, he pulled on his arm. And we examined that closely, and we talked to our medical experts as well. At first, when you see it, you don't know the purpose and the intent. I can tell you that at the conclusion of talking to both everyone and looking at the video from various angles, that Officer Endres, alighting from his vehicle, his cruiser, and seeing that a moped was down and that there was a victim either under or still saddled nearby of that moped, I believe, in my professional opinion, that he tried to pull him away from that moped because the moped was still running and the wheel was still spinning. And that lasted for a second until he came to realize, when others in and around him, other officers, halted him and said, hold on, I think he's injured. And that's when he immediately stops and they picked the moped away from his body and then began checking and administering as much aid as they could. That's the explanation. I believe that. Not in a minute have I thought, even looking at it and standing here today, that it was any malicious intent whatsoever. As these things happen, they happen quick, and the welfare of anyone in our custody, in our control, is first and foremost. And that was his behavior, and I believe that's exactly what his intent was in dealing with Mr. Gonsalves. that concludes for me. Let me ask the Colonel to speak about other aspects of it. I will say that overall the ATV issue is a real challenge for us, as I said yesterday. The ability to safely prevent ATVs in large numbers is a challenge that we haven't solved. A challenge that hasn't been solved in this country. It's a danger to all of us. Police, innocent people, pedestrians, other motorists. And we have asked this department for the past 4 and 5 years as we've seen this trend here in the city of Providence to remove them from the street. Remove them in a safe way. I don't want anyone injured. Innocent people, people that are driving these vehicles, or our police officers. And so our ability is limited because these machines are fast, and we don't have the ability to chase. We've taken about 200 of these ATVs and bikes off the streets of Providence in the last couple of years. And it wasn't by coincidence. It was a result of the men and women on this department using strategy and being creative so nobody gets injured. Unfortunately, this was a situation where we had a couple hundred bikes and ATVs. And doing what we've done in the past, trying to stop these ATVs and scooters on our streets. That's a challenge that we're going to continue to face, and we're going to continue to look at the ways in which we can do this safely. But this issue has been an issue for a couple of years that we haven't yet solved. Let me introduce the Colonel. He'll speak a bit about, there's been a lot of talk about boxing in and a chase and what our direction is to our officers for this problem and in this case. Colonel Collins.
Thank you, Commissioner, Mayor. Thank you for covering the final portions of this investigation of an event. Still has a young man fighting to fully recover. And for that, my personal, the Providence Police Department's thoughts and prayers are with Mr. Gonsalves, his family, to continue to make that progress. I will tell you, there is not a few days that go by when a member of this department has not asked me if I had heard the updated condition on Mr. Gonsalves. So our thoughts and prayers department-wide continue to be for that speedy recovery. We heard yesterday in great detail from the Rhode Island Attorney General about a very extensive, comprehensive investigation in concert with several agencies, the AG's office, the Rhode Island State Police, including several of their units, and with the cooperation of the Providence Police Department. Nothing will change this crash outcome. However, it was important to pour over in great detail the facts surrounding it. I don't want to belabor what the Rhode Island Attorney General spoke about yesterday, or what the Commissioner and Mayor have identified, but again, it was extensive with reviews of cell phone video, the Rhode Island State Police Reconstruction Unit, and I thank the Rhode Island State Police for their work on this, and the Attorney General for their work on this. For surveillance video, cell phone video, police radio transmissions, the black box of the vehicle, multiple witnesses, and pouring over reviews of body-worn cameras. We're all part of the review. I think we'd all agree, the city of Providence, this Providence Police Department, the outside agencies are challenged significantly by this phenomenon of motorbikes, ATVs, scooters, whether alone, whether in small groups, or whether they're in large groups. We continue to look for solutions around that. And I can tell you, I've spoken to colleagues of mine regionally, nationally, like-sized cities, bigger cities, think tanks of policing, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, CALEA, which is a national accreditation of which the Providence Police gained that national certification in 2014 and remain to have that certification. There is no magic solution in any of these agencies with any of these think tanks. And I basically just wanted to put this in some sort of context. So I think we look at the administrative review as it pertains to policy and approach. We asked our officers to go out there and perform their impossible task, led by Major Corey. I mean, this is, not only on this phenomenon, but on this phenomenon is what we're speaking about. It's a near impossible task because it doesn't fall into perfectly a specific policy. And it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to codify in the four corners of a policy how to approach this. And I think we have lessons learned from all the events that we've become involved in. So the challenge of these bikes, these ride-outs, is great. They are rapidly evolving events that play out before you. Each one is different. There may be some that are 5, 10, 25, 50, or hundreds, as was the case in this event. And they may play out in the east side of Providence, Indian Point, Hope Street, Smith Street, Elmwood Avenue, downtown, or in other commercial type areas. Each posing their own unique set of challenges as we address it. There's no question this is a public safety risk, a risk to those involved in the ride-out, a risk to the public, whether they are pedestrians or whether they are in a motor vehicle. And I can tell you, the radio calls come in, as they did on this case. I forget the exact number, but there was a lot of volumes of calls that came in throughout the city with people horrified with what takes place. And some of these ride-outs engage in traffic violations, being left of center, riding on sidewalks, and pulling dangerous stunts in general with these large ride-outs. And that is our challenge. So what is the direction of the Providence Police? So we have two policies, and here's the context I want to put it in, that are operative here. There is a Providence Police pursuit policy, which is outlined and has been available online, and I know Lindsay can make that further available. And it's, I believe, 16 pages, the pursuit policy, and then as well we have a traffic enforcement policy. And by every stretch of the measure, by every event that we have, we try to prevent pursuits at all costs. And that is clearly the direction of the department, of the officers in charge, the OICs, of the supervisors of the Providence Police. And these events routinely happen. And you will routinely hear the supervisor call out for further information and terminate a pursuit, or allow it to continue if it falls within the confines of the policy. The other policy that comes into play is the traffic enforcement policy. Now, due to the unpredictable nature of the events, these rapidly evolving events of ATVs, we just don't know what's going to play out. We've seen all sorts of events on these ATVs where these events play out in front of you. And so this event fell into the line of traffic enforcement. So there was no pursuit. The direction of the leadership of the Providence Police, very well done by the sergeant earlier that day, is we've been consistent on. Monitor the group, follow them, do so safely, be on the lookout for criminal activity, whether it's motor vehicle or flashing of weapons, which they've done in the past. Use your lights to alert other motorists if there's activity that shows that people are going through traffic control signals, which is oftentimes the case, or they're going left of center. Use your lights to notify other motorists. You could think if you're coming from a side street onto a main thoroughfare and you see this large group coming, and as you take a turn onto a major thoroughfare, hopefully the first thing you'll see is a police light to alert you, okay, there's people operating towards you in your direction. So lights are important. At times, we also escort them to safer locations, as was the case in this event. This was an escort down Elmwood Avenue, going relatively smoothly, at relatively low speeds. And then, lastly, as the commissioner has identified and was brought up yesterday, and I think the mayor identified it, we've successfully been able to take 200 of these vehicles off the street in a safe and prudent manner. Now, how does that happen? It doesn't happen with pursuits. It doesn't happen with boxing in. And I know that became a question in this event. So I just want to clarify, boxing in is prohibited in our pursuit policy. However, in the traffic enforcement policy, and to attain the apprehension of a ATV motor vehicle, certainly we try to block them in when they're stopped or going at a very low speed. That is how we get them. That is the only way to capture a motor vehicle. We try by design when the vehicle is stopped or going at a very low speed. So what we oftentimes see, and this is part of the phenomena, is where there will be a pack, and then as we're escorting them, some of these bikes may separate from the larger group. They may peel off. And that is where we've been able to have success in making safe and prudent motor vehicle stop and properly cite the operator and properly seize the vehicle. So in this event, it was like we've identified, a rapid succession of events. And it happens probably within 7 seconds, where the scooter veers off from Elmwood Avenue towards Bissell Street, and the police officer follows in the direction of the scooter, and then is unable to navigate and negotiate that turn. And that is what the Commissioner identified, the safe operation of vehicles, which substantiates the preventable accident and substantiates that administrative function. Again, this is a very large challenge for the Providence Police Department, and on this event, that is what played out. The tail end was rapid, and we lodged the proper charge. I think administrative charges have to be equitable and consistent and shouldn't be driven by the total. We look at the totality, the comprehensive look of the entire event, and that's what we've done here. We've brought over countless pieces of information. I want to thank the Office of Professional Responsibility, Major Oscar Perez. He's there as well. He worked on this case from start to finish. He cooperated with the investigation with the Allen Attorney General's office and the Ground State Police. So that's what we have, and I think I'll hand it back over to the Commissioner, and we'll stand for questions regarding the specifics.
Thank you, Colonel. I think that covers everything administratively as a result of this incident. And I don't think there's anything else that we'd like to provide to you. So we'll open up for any questions.
Has these officers been previously apprised of these charges, and have they responded or do any intent to contest them?
Some have, some, they all have been apprised, and some have accepted, some were in the process.
Process of contesting?
Yes.
And can you detail which ones?
Well,
Who is contesting?
Andres has accepted his sanction. The two other, Cabral, Ferraris, Diaz, partially.
Meaning
And so the two, so let me make it easier. The two that you see at the end of the film, McParland and Diaz, are still pending.
Those are the ones.
The others have accepted, if you
Those are the ones that were addressing the guy filming, and they have not accepted the.
will. We're in process, so there's discussions about that.
The explanation that Officer Andres gave about box this guy in was that he was like waiting for him to stop to box in his vehicle once it was safely stopped. Does the department accept that explanation and believe him when he says that, and doesn't think that he meant a violation of the pursuit policy?
Right, so as the colonel reiterated, our pursuit policy prohibits boxing in. Why? If officers box people in a high-speed pursuit at 50, 70, 100 miles an hour, it's dangerous and it's probably deadly. And so the boxing in term relates to both in the policy and practice in those scenarios. That's prohibited. Blocking or boxing in a safe manner, that's how we get these motor vehicles, these ATVs. So when, although understood, they looked at what he meant when he said box this guy in, it wasn't a pursuit. There was no reaction by other officers as a result of his transmission. So it wasn't executed. That's how the Attorney General looked at it. We too looked at it that way, that there was no boxing in, but had there been a safe boxing in, there's no prohibition with that.
So you basically but accepted his explanation that he was not referring to boxing someone in while traveling, I mean, at least I think like 30 miles an hour down the street. So you don't think that there was a violation of the pursuit policy here?
There was no pursuit, so you can't violate a policy in which a high-speed pursuit policy wasn't engaged. So no is the answer.
I think the family is skeptical of his explanation, of even the explanation that McParland was just happening to be pulling out and wasn't responding.
Understood, and I understand that frustration in belief by some and the family, of course. But we examine, those two aspects in every way we can, including McParland as he, leaves Bissell and traverses, stops, and then goes on Elmwood North. So we looked at those aspects, and there's no violation for that specific behavior by Andres and McParland.
If I could pick up on that point, I think people are going to be confused at the difference between a pursuit and an escort when the punishments between the two, the policy differences, I guess, allow for a higher level of punishment. I mean, they're going to see the video, they're going to see that he's followed, and that it appears that he turns right to avoid the car. I mean, what can you say to the people who are just not going to latch on to the fact that this wasn't a pursuit by classification, but he was being followed by an officer?
Sure. No, I understand the distinction, but the policy is clear when a pursuit happens. Whether you call it in, whether you follow exactly the policy. So Officer Andres was following. Some could say you're pursuing. No lights on. He's following and he continues to follow, and we know what happened thereafter. we take responsibility, and he has taken responsibility for violating not the pursuit policy, but our safe driving policy.
Does this imposition of discipline and delineation of policy, pursuit policy and so forth, does this absolve the city of responsibility in that they're going to bring suit against the city?
Look, I can't speculate what's going to happen. I heard that they're interested and will be filing a suit, and that'll play its course.
Can you say what discipline you would try to impose on Diaz and McFarland that they're not accepting?
Can't talk about it right now. Eventually, when we come to the final, disposition, we'll let you know.
Can you say what exactly they violated?
Well, if you looked at the film, right, and so I need to put it in context. Look, at any crime scene, and as officers arrive to a crime scene, although this was a crash, a serious crash, controlling that general area is what they're trained to do. And so when doing that, sometimes officers get a bit aggressive when people try to traverse into that crime scene. And so, you saw the film, and there were two officers trying to do the job, not knowing what the circumstances were, because they didn't know, and trying to keep people from entering into that general area. And they could have done it a little more professional.
The question is, you investigate in the police. What about Jhamal? You want to press criminal charges?
I couldn't
The
understand.
kids in the hospital, the guy who provoked the accident, because you're making it that the police provoked the accident. He provoked the accident himself. Are you going to pursue criminal charges with Jhamal?
So,
Or we want to glorify criminals? That's what you're doing.
I couldn't understand the last.
Glorifying criminals. That's what we're doing here.
Oh, no, we're not doing. We're not.
Oh yeah? But then press criminal charges because people violating the rules and the law in the city of Providence.
But this was a tragic crash that occurred, and a young man struggles for not only his life, but getting back to his health. So I take exception that, he's a criminal and he ought to be, charged criminally as well.
So you're going to proceed with charges?
I understand your question and your point, but at this point, we've investigated this, and as the Attorney General has reviewed and we have reviewed, we're not expecting to bring any criminal charges as it relates to this case going forward.
I want to ask you about the body cameras. So at the beginning of all of this, there was a plea for people in the public to turn over video. Providence Police lucky enough to have body cameras, and then there were 3 officers that did not have them on. You're concerned with that and the fact that it could have been critical video, not just in this case, but other cases in the future.
Yeah, so we're always concerned, and we always impress upon our officers wear them, and we get pretty aggressive. Turn them on, we get pretty aggressive when they don't. And there's a process, so, training, when you're in the height of a situation, it takes time. Look, there's no excuse, they should be wearing them, and they should be activating them. But there's also, if you're the 5th officer or 7th officer on a scene, and you're not first on and you're not interacting with anyone, then the policy doesn't require you to turn it on. We don't need to run video as an officer is directing traffic or standing at a crime scene or those things. So the policy is really clear, and it's really a policy that works, and these officers, for the most part, engage their body cam. And when they don't, they get disciplined. So these 3 that I speak of, 2 were inconsequential. The 3rd was consequential because there was interaction with a civilian. Our message has been both internally and to the public. If you have any doubt, put it on. Just put it on, rather than try to decide, should I put it on in this kind of interaction? So I hear you, but we've come a long way in this department in auditing and ensuring the use of body cameras where we are today. And we're going to continue to hold them responsible for engaging that body cam.
What led you to the conclusion that there was no pursuit here? I think people watching the video would see a police car which previously had its lights on just earlier in the street, looked like it was following pretty closely. Why is that not a pursuit?
So pursuit under the policy and under the state statute requires certain conditions. Speed up over 15 miles an hour. Lights and siren have to be activated. The motorist in any, you as a police officer have to ensure that that motorist knows you're a police officer and you're attempting to stop that vehicle, and there's got to be a flight. So that motorist is going to flee from that traffic stop. And so those are the conditions, and sometimes they happen in 7 seconds, and sometimes they happen in 7 minutes. But as you progress into a pursuit, the officer has obligations in determining whether or not to continue with a pursuit or not, and they're really strict, and it requires immediate supervisory intervention and assessment. And most of our pursuits, when they begin, they get terminated, meaning stop that pursuit. And the officer is told, shut the lights and siren down, do not continue to pursue. Yes, it's too dangerous to innocent people, to the officer, and to the person that's trying to flee.
But
Okay,
doesn't that just
one
sort of,
more round and I'll answer offline, okay?
doesn't that just sort of beg the question though? I mean, you're saying what an appropriate pursuit is. Couldn't one argue that Officer Endres was pursuing him, just doing it in an inappropriate way, without his lights on, without calling it in?
Look, that's why we have policy. Here are the conditions, and it's in the state law. Here are the conditions in which a pursuit is considered a pursuit. And in this, it wasn't. And mindful that I think we're about 7 seconds from the time in which Endres starts to follow, lights off, but leave it, okay, you're gonna start a pursuit with your lights off. 7 seconds later, then crash out.
Mayor, you're satisfied with the handling of this from the police standpoint? Excuse me. You're satisfied with the handling of this?
So let me just add to the commissioner's answer on that last one, and then I'll answer your question, Steve. So I've reviewed every aspect of this, and on the pursuit question, so there's two separate parts to this. There's first the escort, where there are the say dozens/hundreds of bikes going throughout the city. They're being escorted throughout the city by our officers. I don't think that there's a question as to whether that's a pursuit. That is clearly not a pursuit. And then, but I think that what you're getting at is that at that critical moment, perhaps where Mr. Gonsalves veered off, did it at that point turn into a pursuit? And what I have come to understand about the laws and our policies is that whether it is a pursuit or not is irrelevant. The question of boxing them in would relate to if it was a high-speed pursuit. The police department's policy with ATVs is we do not chase unless it's safe to do so. And the way that the police department has been able to get so many of these bikes and ATVs off the streets is when some of them peel off or go into side streets. You follow them so that if there is an opportunity to make a safe apprehension, then at that point you do that. And as the chief explained and also the commissioner, in those circumstances, if it is low speed or if the vehicle is stopped, then that's exactly what you do. You box/block them in place. But as to that question, whether or not it turned sort of magically turned into a pursuit at that critical moment, that's irrelevant for both the criminal investigation and the administrative investigation. So I just wanted to clarify that. With your question, Steve. So several months ago, I stood here and I spoke to the public, and I mentioned that we were committed to doing a full, transparent, and professional investigation, and that we would let the facts lead us to where they may. So I appreciate that the Attorney General went through this entire process. It was thorough, it was transparent, and the facts led them to their conclusion. And we did the exact same thing with respect to administrative charges here in the city. Again, you know, I recognize the mismatch here. I recognize that you have this horrible, horrible consequence where a young man is still in a hospital bed trying to recover. I understand as a father the hurt that the family is going through, watching their son and watching their baby in this condition. At the same time, when it comes to our analysis, we have to let the facts lead us to where they may, and apply that legal standard or that administrative standard. And I believe that the Attorney General did a very thorough and professional job. And I believe that our internal team did a thorough and professional job as well.
Okay, thank you guys.
Okay.